The world's great novels. The NBC University of the Air presents the fourth installment of a four-part radio edition of Arnold Bennett's masterpiece of fiction, The Old Wives' Tale. Another in the series of books that live, the world's great novels.
Since Sophia had run away from home, she and her sister Constance had not seen each other for 30 years. Now they were to be reunited. Yet Constance was in truth a little afraid of meeting Sophia. In 30 years, Sophia might have grown into anything, whereas Constance had remained just Constance. Yes, Constance was afraid, but she had her dignity too, a lot of it, tucked away in her secret heart. When the express arrived from London, she found herself on the fringe of the physically agitated crowd, anxiously looking for Sophia. Presently, she saw a singular dog. Other people also saw it. It was the color of chocolate. It had a head and shoulders richly covered with hair that hung down in tufts like a mop. But its hair stopped suddenly rather less than halfway along the length of the dog's body, the remainder of which was naked and as smooth as marble. The effect was to give the impression that the dog had forgotten an essential part of its attire and was outraging decency.
Not to mention that pink ribbon round its neck. Why, the animal absolutely has the air of a decked trollop. But after all, it's not the dog's fault. That tall and distinguished woman evidently owns it, and I must say that she's a beautiful and aristocratic woman, even though she does seem unaware that bringing such a dog to Bursley, where people are so particular, is... Why, that's Sophia. Oh, no, it can't be. But it is. It's Sophia, and she sees me. Sophia!
Constance,
Oh!
my dear, I should have known you anywhere.
Oh, Sophia, I'm so glad to see you.
And I you.
Did my son Cyril meet you in London?
Oh, yes, at the boat train. And I went to his studio, and he saw me off at Euston. I must say that your son is a very nice boy.
Oh.
I love him.
Do you know, you haven't altered one bit.
Nothing could change a Bain.
No, indeed.
Constance, this is for Seth.
Oh, yes, a dog. Remarkable. Well, we'd better get a cab.
Oh, there's one. Driver. He sees us. And what do you think? A man came up to me at Euston while Cyril was getting my ticket and said, Miss Baines, I've not seen you for over 30 years, but I know you're Miss Baines, or were, and you're looking bonny. And then he went off. I think it must have been Hall, the grocer. Oh, here's our cab. Get in, Constance.
Oh, yes.
Driver, St. Luke's Square.
Yes, Bob.
Get in, Fawcett. There. Now then, they're comfortable.
Sophia, that man who spoke to you, had he got a long whitish beard?
Yes.
Then it was Mr. Hall. He's been here twice. He's an alderman, you know.
Really? But wasn't it queer?
Bless us. Don't talk about queer. It's terrible how time flies.
Well, the town doesn't seem to have changed much. Same smoke, I see.
Same smoke.
It's even worse.
You think so, Sophia? But they're doing something now for smoke abatement.
I must have forgotten how dirty it was. I suppose that's it. I'd no idea.
Really? Well, the fact is it is so. You can't imagine what work it makes, especially with window curtains.
Constance,
now what do you think?
that bridge. That's where I took my first walk with Gerald Scales. Some 30 years ago, nearly.
How long have you been a widow, Sophia?
I don't know that I am a widow. My husband left me in 70, and I've never seen or heard of him since.
Oh, my dear. I thought you were a widow. Mr. Pierce Swinnerton said he was told positively you were a widow. But it never occurred to me.
Of course, I always passed for a widow in Paris.
Of course. I see.
And I may be a widow.
The next morning, Sophia arose and went to her bedroom window. Holding aside the blind, she looked forth upon St. Luke's Square. She had expected, of course, to find that the square had shrunk in size, but she was startled to see how small it was. The whole scene, paltry, confined, and dull, seemed to her the extreme of provinciality. She thought,
Tell me if I had to live here. Deadly. It weighs on me. And the dirt, the horrible ugliness. The way they talk, and the way they think. Felt it when I arrived at the station yesterday. Of course, the square is rather picturesque, but such a poor, poor little thing. Fancy having to look at it every morning of one's life.
indeed, it struck Sophia that Constance did not appear to realize the condition of dirt, decay, and provinciality in which she was living. Even Constance's house was extremely inconvenient, dark, and no doubt unhealthy. A cellar kitchen, no hall, abominable stairs, and as to hygiene, simply medieval. 1 month passed, during which time Constance's old servant Amy gave notice in a huff over having to feed the dog, Fawcett. Moreover, as her son Cyril was remiss in writing to her, it seemed to Constance that the time was out of joint, and life itself unworth living. Worries loomed mountainous, and she began to fret. Suppose Cyril were dangerously ill in London and unable to write. Suppose something had happened to him. Suppose she were unable to obtain a new servant.
Well, you got your letter from Cyril yet?
No, nothing. Sophia, here it is at last.
Good.
Oh, bless us. Here's news. Cyril's coming down. That's why he hasn't written as usual. A telegram for me, Sophia. Open it. What does it say?
It's from Cyril. Sorry, can't come down. Prevented last moment. Cyril.
To make matters worse, Amy criminally failed one morning to latch the street door of the parlor, and Constance caught a chill. Before evening, she was ill in bed, suffering from sciatica. Dr. Sterling was sent for. When he was leaving, Sophia went with him to the door.
Well, I must be getting on.
Then there's nothing else I'm to do for my sister.
Don't think so. It isn't a question of medicine.
Then what is it a question of, Doctor?
Nerves. Nearly all nerves. I know something about your sister's constitution now, and I was hoping that your visit would do her good.
She's been quite well until she sat in that draft.
Mm-hmm. No worries?
Oh, what can she have in the way of worries? That's to say, real worries.
Exactly.
I tell her she doesn't know what worry is.
So do I.
She was a little upset because she didn't receive her usual letter from Cyril, and then he failed to come down.
Mm-hmm.
She's also a little bothered, I think, because the servant is going to leave.
What does she bother with servants at all for? She's perfectly free. She has not got a care in the world, if she only knew it. Why doesn't she go out in a boot and enjoy herself? She wants stirring up. That's what your sister wants.
You're quite right. That's precisely what I say to myself. Precisely.
She needs to be jolly. Why doesn't she go to some seaside place and live in a hotel and enjoy herself? Is there anything to prevent her?
Nothing whatever.
I believe in enjoying oneself when you've got the money to do it with. Can you imagine anybody living in Bursley for pleasure? Oh. And especially here in St. Luke's Square, right in thick of it all. Smoke, dirt, no air, no light, no scenery, no amusement. What does she do it for? She's in a rut.
Yes, she's in a rut.
My word. Wouldn't I clear out and enjoy myself if I could? Except that she's nervously organized and has certain predispositions. There is nothing the matter with her. I don't say her sciatica would be cured, but there's absolutely no need for her to be here at all.
Dr. Sterling, I agree with every word you say.
Naturally, she's attached to the place after living here all her life, but she's got to break herself of her attachment. It's her duty to do so. She ought to show a little more energy. I'm deeply attached to my bed on cold mornings, but I have to leave it.
Of course.
What she needs is the bustle of life in a good hotel. She would not be the same woman.
Did you ever mention this to my sister?
Oh, yes, I've told her, but she really thinks it's quite impossible. She won't listen. Mrs. Scales, you try it.
A week before Easter, the guests of the Rutland Hotel in the Broadwalk, Buxton, being assembled for afternoon tea in the lounge of that establishment, witnessed the arrival of two middle-aged ladies and a dog. The dog's name was Fawcett. The shorter and stouter of the two ladies did not impose herself with much force on the collective vision of the Rutlands. Her gestures were timid and nervous. But the tall lady was of a different stamp. Handsome, stately, and deliberate, she had the assured gaze of a person who is thoroughly habituated to the inspection of strangers. Sophia felt that she had performed a miracle. She had. A few weeks later came the fatal letter which vindicated Constance's dark apprehensions in leaving her home. The servant whom she had hired to take the departed Amy's place had decided not to take the position after all. Sophia felt that the situation created by this letter would demand her highest powers in dealing with it. If Constance were to be saved from herself, there was no one but Sophia to save her.
I tell you what I've been thinking, Constance.
What?
There's no earthly reason why you should go back to Bursley. The house won't run away, and it's costing nothing but the rent. Why not take things easy for a bit?
And stay here?
Not necessarily here, if you don't care for it. There are plenty of other places we could go to.
I don't think I should be easy in my mind. What with nothing being settled? The house...
What does it matter about the house, Constance?
It matters a great deal. I didn't leave things as if we were going to be away for a long time. No, just wouldn't do.
Well, I don't see that anything could come to any harm. I really don't. Dirt can always be cleaned, after all. I think you ought to go about more to do you good. All the good in the world. And there's no reason why you shouldn't go about. You're perfectly free. Why shouldn't we go abroad together, for instance, you and I? I'm sure you'd enjoy it very much.
Abroad?
Yes. There are lots of places we could go to and live very comfortably among nice English people.
I don't think going abroad would suit me.
Why not? You don't know, my dear. You've never tried.
I don't think it would. I'm one of your stay-at-homes. I'm not like you. We can't all be alike.
Well, then, what about here in England or Scotland? There are several places I should like to visit. Torquay, Tunbridge Wells. I've always understood that Tunbridge Wells is a very nice town indeed, with very superior people and a beautiful climate.
I think I shall have to be getting back to St. Luke's Square, Sophia. There's so much to be done.
You're making a mistake, Constance, if you'll allow me to say so.
A mistake?
A very great mistake.
I don't see how I can be making a mistake.
No, I'm sure you don't see it, but you are. You know, Constance, you're just a little apt to let yourself be a slave to that house of yours. Instead of the house existing for you, you exist for the house.
Oh, Sophia, what ideas you do have, to be sure. No one could take things easier than I do as regards housekeeping. I can assure you I let dozens of little matters go rather than bother myself.
Then why do you bother now?
I just can't leave the place like that.
It's another thing I don't quite understand. That is why you live in St. Luke's Square at all.
Well, I must live somewhere, Sophia. And I'm sure it's very pleasant.
In all that smoke. And with that dirt. And the house is very old.
It's a great deal better built than a lot of those new houses by the park.
You'll never get a servant to stay in that cellar kitchen. That's another thing.
Oh, I don't know about that. Amy didn't object to it. Now, it's all very well for you, Sophia, to talk like that. But I can assure you that my house is looked upon as a very good house indeed.
Oh, I don't say it isn't. But you'd be better away from it. Everyone says that.
Everyone? Who? Who's been talking about me?
Well, the doctor, for instance.
Dr. Sterling? Well, I like that. He's always saying that Bursley's one of the healthiest climates in England.
Dr. Sterling thinks you ought to get away more, not stay always in that dark house.
Oh, does he? Well, if it's of any interest to Dr. Sterling, I like my dark house.
Constance, hasn't he ever told you you ought to get away more?
Well, he may have mentioned it.
When he was talking to me, he did a good deal more than mention it. And I've a good mind to tell you what he said.
Do.
You don't realize how serious it is, I'm afraid. You can't see yourself. Now, there's no doubt that both your sciatica and your palpitations are due to nerves. And you let your nerves get into a state because you worry over trifles. So change would do you a tremendous amount of good. It's just what you need. Really, you must admit, Constance, that the idea of living always in a place like St. Luke's Square, when you're free to do what you like and go where you like, oh, you must admit that's rather too much.
Well, some of us like Bursley. Black as it is.
Now, my dear Constance.
No, it's no use. I've got to go back home and look after things. It's no use. Here we are, pitching money about in this place. It's perfectly sinful. Drives and carriages, extras. $1 a day extra for your dog. I never heard of such goings-on. And I'd sooner be at home.
As far as the money's concerned, Constance, we'll consider that you're here as my guest, if that's how you look at it.
Oh, no, it isn't the money I grudge.
I've only been talking to you for your own good.
Then I wish you wouldn't try to domineer over me.
Domineer? Well, Constance, I do.
Oh, Sophia, I didn't mean that, but please forgive me. But you can't alter me. I'm like that. I know I'm silly, but it's no use.
It's all right, Constance. It's all right. I quite understand. Don't bother anymore. We'll go back to St. Luke's Square.
In yielding to Constance's terrible inertia, Sophia intended, upon their return to St. Luke's Square, to work her own will on the interior of the house and to modernize it. But the house defied her and remained unchanged. 9 years passed, and during those years Constance was never able to advance a single argument for remaining. Yet she would not budge. And then one day a telegram arrived for Sophia.
Sophia, what has happened? What does it say?
I'll read it. Mr. Gerald Scales is dangerously ill here. Signed, Boldero, 49 Deansgate, Manchester.
God save us. Will our worries never cease?
I'd forgotten him. It's been 36 years since he deserted me in Paris. And now he turns up again. And I suppose he still considers himself my husband.
He must be an old, enfeebled man by now.
What of it? Whatever my feelings towards him, tenderness is not among them. I've had my share of trouble. More than my share. And now the end of my life promises to be as awful as the beginning. It's monstrous. I can't stand it. I wish I were dead.
Sophia, what shall we do?
I must see him.
Now?
Immediately.
Would you like me to come with you, Sophia?
No, I must go by myself.
2 hours later, Sophia arrived in Manchester. Number 49 Deansgate looked like a jeweler's shop, but the conventional sign over a side entrance showed that at heart it was a pawnbroker's. As she entered, a clerk approached her.
Can I see Mr. Bolderow? I'm Mrs. Cales.
Yes, madam. Oh, Mr. Bolderow. One moment. Ah, Mrs. Scale?
Yes.
Please come this way. I didn't expect you so soon. I looked up the trains from Bursley, and I didn't see how you could get here before 6.
I came by motor car.
Oh, right in here. I'm afraid I've got bad news for you, Mrs. Scales.
He's dead?
Yes. It happened very suddenly. Very suddenly.
Where is he?
In the back room. He came in last night just as we were closing. We had a heavy rain here, and he was wet, in a dreadful state, simply dreadful. He asked me if I was the son of Mr. Till Bolderow that had this shop in 1866. I said I was. Well, he says, you're the only connection I've got. My name's Gerald Scales. My mother was your father's cousin. Can you do anything for me, he says. I could see he was ill, so I had him in here. When I found he couldn't eat nor drink, I sent for the doctor. The doctor got him to bed. He passed away at 1 o'clock this afternoon.
What was wrong with him?
Exhaustion, I suppose. Do you wish to see him?
Yes.
You haven't seen him for a long time?
Not since 70.
Oh, 70. I fear it's been a sad business for you, Mrs. Scales.
You were very good to take him in. It must have been exceedingly trying for you.
Oh, no. You mustn't talk like that. I couldn't leave a Bolderow on the pavement, and an old man at that. And to think that if he'd only managed to please his uncle, he might have been one of the richest men in Lancashire. Will you come now, or will you wait a bit?
I'll come now.
Yes. Right back here. I'm afraid it's a little gloomy in this back room. There he is. On the bed there.
That old man.
Yes.
But he's so pitiably old. So withered. Oh, how tired he must have been. He was once so young. Now he's old and worn and horrible and dead.
Yes.
Did he tell you anything?
Nothing, except that he had come from Liverpool. Judging from his shoes, I should say he must have walked a good bit of the way.
At his age.
Yes. Yes, he must have been in great straits. By the way, there are his clothes. I had them put aside.
They're very shabby.
Yes, and still wet. Mrs. Scales, there's nothing you can do for him now. Tell me your wishes about the funeral. I will arrange everything.
All my bitter grievance against him crumbles to nothing. He and I once loved and burned and quarreled in the scornful pride of our youth. And now time has worn us out.
Driving back under the melancholy arch of evening, the sadness of the earth seemed to possess Sophia anew. 2 hours later, when the car drew up in St. Luke's Square, the chauffeur found her slumped over. She was dead from a stroke caused by the shock of seeing Gerald again. Constance frequently thought of Sophia, and she felt compassion for the disaster of her sister's life. What a career. A brief passion for Gerald Scales, then nearly 30 years of self-imposed slavery, managing a Paris rooming house. Why, hers had not been a life at all. Yet there had been something so fine about Sophia. Then Constance also died, and there remained only her servant and the old dog, Fawcett. And when Fawcett was fed, she would awkwardly balance herself on her old legs in front of her plate, on the chance that it might, after all, contain something worth inspection.
The Old Wives' Tale by Arnold Bennett is one of the world's great novels, brought to you each week by the NBC University of the Air. Listen next week for a dramatization of Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. And don't forget that these and countless other great books are to be had in your local public library. To enhance your enjoyment of these broadcasts, NBC offers you Herbert Gorman's Handbook of the World's Great Novels. Just send 25 cents with your request to World's Great Novels, Post Office Box 30, Station J, New York 27, New York. That's World's Great Novels, Post Office Box 30, Station J, New York 27. The Old Wives' Tale was adapted for radio by Frederick Schlick. The music was composed by Emil Soderstrom, and the orchestra directed by Bernard Berquist. The entire production under the direction of Homer Heck. Ken Nordine was the narrator. Sophia was played by Geraldine Kay, Constance by Nanette Sargent, Dr. Sterling by Everett Clark, Mr. Boldero by Sidney Elstrom, and the cab driver and clerk by Cliff Norton. And this is Dave Garraway. The program came to you from Chicago and was a presentation of the National Broadcasting Company and its independent affiliated stations. When disaster strikes, fire, flood, or hurricane, the Red Cross is always first on the scene with medical care, food, clothing, and shelter. So give to the Red Cross and give generously. Your Red Cross must carry on. This is NBC, the National Broadcasting